could be sent on a deep penetration mission. Very few returned.
Ready when you are.
Hands, face, space, and time. All in a lockdown and live edition of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast where copper output has risen by 13%, with your fully socially distanced hosts John West
and Matt Needer. Tonight, humanity will be dead as, well, a dodo, if First Doctor William Hartnell can't deliver a timely vaccine after his companion goes viral, spaceship shenanigans, and one-eyed horrors in 1966 epic The Ark.
The Doctor delves deep, leaving Perry floored. Will Peter Davison be up to the task of saving his friend, combating an evil monopoly, and setting up a successful later run of the show? Laughs aplenty in fan favourite The Caves of Androzani.
And no Netflix, no sourdough starter, and no tumble dryer. The Time Lords enforce social distancing, and Peter Capaldi's left taking his fist to a hard one. Philosophical fun in 2015 thriller Heaven Sent.
So scrap your social plans, cancel the restaurant booking, let the box office have your theatre tickets, and stay right where you are, for I'll Explain Later, live from London.
Right, so we're actually running. Hello, welcome to I'll Explain Later live.
Seamless.
It's very exciting, isn't
seamless.
It? Yeah, I like to feel that...
You can take the boy out of telly, but...
No, absolutely. God, yeah. I like to feel that we've brought internet and technology full circle. You know, we've closed a 25-year loop here, bringing all of this amazing technology we have at our disposal back into the surface of two white guys in their late 30s talking about Doctor Who.
Which, you know, we need more of that, I think.
We definitely need more of that, absolutely. So how are you, John? How's your lockdown been?
Well, it was going okay till just now. Obviously, I've had to watch a lot of Doctor Who in quite short order. Some things never change.
No, absolutely.
And you know, I would say as well that I think this is a really good opportunity for people who have listened to the show before to see just how much magic is done by the edit, because obviously they're going to see the full. Unedited, uncut, live and uncut.
And it's been a bit of a while since we last did a show as well, so we're looking about 18 months here, and I think
it looks more looking at you.
Yeah, I know, God, absolutely. I mean, I've aged at least 10 years in that time. But yeah, no, it's just one thing or another. We didn't intend to go on such a long hiatus. We do actually have an unreleased episode in the can, which rather got held up by the fact that I totaled my computer by pouring a cup of coffee over it.
I think there's a fascinating read in that episode of whatever Doctor Who it was we were reviewing and how it played out in the Brexit parliamentary shenanigans and Theresa May's premiership and where it will go next.
Yeah, I think last time we were talking about Doctor Who, we were talking about Theresa May as well, which rather dates things somewhat.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a missing episode out there which will probably make its way out once Philip Morris has worked his magic. Yeah.
There you go.
And then sort of various other things, not least this global pandemic got in the way. But we are back, we are live, we are ready to talk about Doctor Who, aren't we, John?
Yes, and we've already got some interaction on the fan chat, as we're going to call it for the rest of the episode. Max Wren 1970, good evening, fellas. Good evening to you, Max Wren 1970.
That's
Martin
you,
says, hello there. Vaishti says too long, and people, Old Man Crondas, all right lads, very bit Michael Barrymore, something we don't, perhaps a name you don't hear too much these days. Anyway, so moving on to dodgy light entertainers of the earlier era.
What a smooth segue. You haven't lost your touch in 18 months. So we've got 3 Doctor Who stories that we're going to talk about tonight. They have, to a greater or lesser extent, got some connection to this current situation that the world finds itself in, I think we could say. Not least of which, some of the links are a bit tenuous, as they tend to be in these circumstances. But yeah, hopefully... Oh, it's good product placement there, John.
Sorry, it's not your beer, though, is it?
No. So once John has refreshed his glass, would you like to introduce what we're going to be talking about first tonight?
Oh, yes. So, we've got 3 Doctor Who stories for you, obviously. The first, 1966 classic, The Ark, from season 3 of the original show's run. Because there was a little bit of a hiatus there, just between there was some of the people watching might not be aware. Anyway, so the Ark season 3, 5th to the 26th of March 1966, in which the Doctor, Stephen, and Dodo Chaplet, fan favourite Dodo Chaplet, as I always refer to her, find themselves on a floating Eden project in space, which is taking the last of humanity and their monoid friends to a planet called Refusis 2. They're on their way, and it's going to take 700 years. And Dodo Chaplet, carelessly, frankly, and without due care or attention, manages to infect everyone with a common cold that nobody has the has the antibodies to fight off. And so, with hilarious consequences. I think that's a fair summary. Although, as I think we'll probably discuss, that's really only half the story, quite literally. I mean,
literally, it is a story of two halves.
I mean, the well, that's another point, but the writers, Paul Erickson and Leslie Scott. Leslie Scott, I believe, was his wife.
Yes.
Who, from my extensive Wikipedia searching, i.e. reading the Wikipedia page on this, basically there's no evidence that she really wrote a single word of it. But nonetheless, Paul Erickson, who does seem to have done the lion's share, has addressed the age-old
in his only
problem.
Doctor Who script as well.
Indeed. And he seems to have addressed the age-old problem of how to structure a story over 4 25-minute episodes by deciding not to. So it's very much kind of 2 stories. Yes, the second story is linked, but it's pretty much two-parter, really, isn't it?
Mm. So what did you think of the Ark?
Yes, Matt. No, what did I think of it? No, I thought it was. Look, I'm on record as loving this era of the show, and Stephen as this kind of exasperated beefcake. Sort of just running around going, oh, why don't we do something? And then eventually doing something in a highly masculine and muscular way. It sends me all a quiver. So I like this era. Not a great deal of time for, despite being a fan favourite for Dodo Chaplet. She's very much there, along with her variety. She's a woman of 1,000 voices. That
is astonishing. Her accent changes by the week, which I remember reading something somewhere that said that there was an early idea that she was going to be a Cockney, and the higher ups at the BBC said that no, she needed to deliver her lines in the Queen's English, and that it would be unacceptable to have a Cockney in the TARDIS, but. She is a bit Cockney at sometimes, and at other times she's full sort of BBC RP, and then at other times she's Scouse, and then she's Yorkshire for a whole episode.
No, there's a really broad sort of Lincolnshire bit at one point. Sorry, not Lincolnshire, Lancashire. Yeah, it's astonishing. Probably there is a bit of Lincolnshire in there as well. I mean, she doesn't leave a region untouched, does she?
And it's sort of, it's one of those reminders that you're watching something that I think was really not meant to be rewatched in close proximity. It's like, you can well imagine the production team going, people will have forgotten by next week where she's meant to be from. They're never going to see this again.
Yeah, also, why
we are to pick over it.
And she appears to be dressed in the cast-offs from Ivanhoe as well.
Yes.
So, I don't know what that's all about.
This is coming straight off the back of The Massacre, which I think we reviewed good few years ago now, where... It's she sort of just wanders into the TARDIS at the end of the story, and it's sort of tenuously implied that she's the granddaughter or the great-granddaughter of one of the French girls that was killed in the massacre.
I mean, there's 400 years. It's going to be quite a great
a few generations.
Granddaughter, I would guess.
And that's a thread that's never really sort of followed up on.
I think it's for the best.
It's said at the end of The Massacre that she's an orphan, so...
Dr. Huguenot. Sorry.
This is quality content, John. But yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone has ever claimed that because we've seen Dodo in The Massacre, we've seen her here, we've seen her in the Gunfighters, which I think it's fair to say that we didn't really have much to say about, and we've seen her in the War Machines, where by that point their approach to writing her out is not even on screen. It's like
We've
they
a
send her off to the
Cyclops in
country,
stained pinstripes and his boiler suited pigs. That's a deep cut for the fans there.
Deep cut for the fans. But yeah, I mean, Dodo is not a character I think that has ever worked. But here, I mean, straight off the bat, there is an attempt to give her something dramatic to do. I mean, she very much sets the whole plot in motion. And I think, we may as well talk about this sort of near the top. The whole point of why we're looking at this story as part of our lockdown special is that it sees quite a good chunk of humanity wiped out by a cold. So you've got this ark in the future that's carrying the remnants of humanity, and Dodo turns up and she's sneezing and she spreads this coal around the ship. And I don't know, it's like it was. I'm not saying it was necessarily a horrifying insight into the world that we live in now, but it was striking to see people like recoiling from a woman sniffling. There's all those scenes where they have to go around wearing like protective gear over their faces.
Well, the PPE is a lot more
PPE
bling
visors,
than the stuff they hand out now, right?
Yeah. Although I also thought that, like today, no one could actually quite work out the right way to wear it. I mean, some people have got it over their eyes. Some people have not
some people have
covered
their noses out, and it's just like, I mean, I'm much more judgmental about that now than I would have been perhaps watching that straight off.
Yeah. But it's sort of all there, and how it can spread, and it is really unsettling to watch that in the current context of what we're seeing now.
Although, frankly, if I'd known that it was just going to be a few cells of zebra skin and some amphibian skin, and you just knock that together and you got an antidote, then I don't know. I can't help but feel that Pfizer and Moderna and the rest of them are just pulling a fast one. Because at the end of the day, you just need some animal skins. And its approach to vaccine science is limited, I think. I will say the doctor's condescension. Pleasant condescension towards his monoid lab assistant is one of the high points. So, you're really rather helpful, aren't you? And all that stuff. I absolutely adore that. Condescending old bugger. Love it.
So what do you make of the monoids then?
Well, hey, we're the monoids. And people say we monoid around. They are kind of like reptilian, pre-apic members of the monkeys, right? I mean, they got the kind of 60s bowl cut. The director, Michael Imison, took the credit for inventing the monoids. He said, having been a script editor, very happy to sort of make suggestions. I thought they'd be a whiz-bang thing for BBC Enterprises to market, put the ping-pong ball in their mouths. It looks really weird. I think it's the kind of monster that people it's the kind of thing that people kind of make fun of 60s Doctor Who for, but it gives it all its fun and character. I love them. I think they're fantastic. And I really like the kind of worm that turned aspect of the final two, because especially the way that number one monoid lords it up, like, just chucking his chicken wing bones down and drinking.
There's
not
been
quite
an
sure how
attempt
he's
to characterise them, hasn't there? Which tends not to happen so often with monsters, and they've all got slightly different physiques, which I quite like. There's the one who's got a bit of a belly on him.
Yeah, number four. I remember. I made a note of number four. Number four's got his head screwed on.
And they kind of waddle around in their little dresses as well.
Yeah. No, I've got to say, I think that this, having said that sort of Ericsson has made the decision to essentially do a two-parter and then a two-parter to keep the kind of momentum going, I feel it is a game of two halves, really. The first two episodes, I think, really sing. It's quite a good morality play. I thought you could draw a parallel even with Midnight, the David Tennant episode that obviously I think you and I both like so much, particularly the trial scene where Zentos is kind of the more doubtful, suspicious, paranoid character, and it's really evil the way he dresses up what he's doing as, we believe in a fair process and all that, but what he's really doing is being a demagogue. He's whipping up the crowd against these newcomers.
And it's interesting, sorry, just to butt in there, it is interesting how quickly the sort of this kind of enlightened society kind of vibe that they've got going on. I mean, even down to the sort of slightly kind of Grecian costumes that they're wearing. I made a note of that because I've always sort of I've always been interested by why future societies tend to wear this sort of variant on the kind of like either Greek or Roman kind of toga sort of vibe going on. And I think it's obviously the shorthand is obviously designed to be like to suggest that this is a version of humanity that's kind of got its shit together, really. They're facing a environmental catastrophe. They're out there doing something about it. It's a very sort of equal society. But as soon as something goes wrong and this virus kind of emerges among them, they all very quickly sort of factionalize and become hysterical, and the whole thing sort of slides out of control a little bit. And there's this real split between, the people who want to scapegoat the people that bring the pandemic to their door versus the people who want to sort of scientifically reason their way out of it, and justice and due process kind of goes out the window. So again, I thought that was another thing that was sort of quite interesting about the varying levels of hysteria that sort of socially fracture this society when the virus kind of takes root. Sorry, I butted in on you there.
No, I completely agree, and I think that all of that is drawn quite well. How they try to, between the sort of the governor, the elder, and the way that he obviously is cut from slightly more liberal cloth, whereas Zentos is kind of more of a reactionary figure. But how they both use the rules, or how they are, how they claim that the rules are in their favour in how they're managing the situation, even though they manage it very differently. And so, the worst of intentions can be dressed up in quite constitutional language, or we're doing, this is due process and all that sort of thing. So I thought it was quite nice. I liked the world building. I liked the kind of the miniaturization and the fact that humanity was kept in stasis.
There's real Paul Daniels Magic Show vibes to the miniaturization chamber, which I quite enjoyed when he goes into the box and you see him through the perspex. It's
extremely high-tech cardboard, that thing. It's flimsy, but it's effective. So I really liked that. I felt like the first two episodes were a quite convincing morality play, where about incomers and doubt and demagoguery, and how people can be manipulated, and how that manipulation can be dressed in the reasonableness of the rules. And I think that's well done. And obviously, what comes to the rescue: liberalism, science, dialogue.
Yeah.
And I feel that the whole and this is echoed again in episode 4, but it's almost like, I suppose, to be fair to Eriksson, he does go for that echo in the second. I think it's just a bit jarring, but when the Doctor says you must travel with understanding as well as hope, that for me feels like it's exactly what I want from Doctor Who.
Yeah,
exactly what I want. I want adventure. I want peril. I want to be worried about the companions and the Doctor or the people they've encountered. I want to be plunged into the drama of it, but I want, at the end of the day, this good-hearted element that you must travel with understanding as well as hope. And I feel like the Doctor, by this period, the later period of Hartnell, the character's been on such development to the point where he really embodies that. And I think it's really well done. And then they go 700 years into the future, and I just feel like the second half kind of...
You get a run around with some invisible aliens.
And it's, it's kitschy and fun, but... And in a way, I suppose, if you want to be charitable to Eriksson and his wife, Leslie Scott, the charitable read would be... that when you don't travel with understanding as well as hope, that you get this chaos and civil war. And so that has to come to a resolution. But what I will just finally say is that the Doctor sort of acknowledges at the end that he had missed that the monoids were kind of in a servile position in the first half. And so it reminded me a bit of Planet of the Ood, again, the 10th Doctor, where he sort of makes a point of saying, I hadn't really done anything about the fact that they were a slave race before. I hadn't really clocked it. And it's a bit like the Doctor does the same thing here. He says, well, they didn't treat the monoids very well, so it's not really surprising they rose up. But he didn't really clock that or notice it or do anything about it the first time round.
So this, like, sort of brings to mind a few things that I kind of spotted watching it. I mean, I was sort of slightly... I mean, it makes sense dramatically for that sort of turn halfway through to be, you know, where the monoids, who are the sort of docile, sort of friendly servants, rise up against the humans. I wondered, and I don't know, this people might consider this a bit of a reach. There is a slightly uncomfortable sort of "don't trust refugees" kind of subtext to that. That, you know, there's the notion that, you know, obviously this race that was also from a dying planet came to Earth and said, look, we'll help you out if we can hitch a lift to a better joint, and then at the first opportunity overthrow the humans and take it over. But then, you know, as we talked about when we looked at the Unquiet Dead, I mean, Doctor Who's been making those mistakes right into the 21st century. So, you know, that's something that Doctor Who would have later form on.
Yeah, I feel like, given that precise message is undercut by the central thrust of you must travel with understanding as well as hope, and the fact that the Doctor, Dodo and Stephen are themselves newcomers, and precisely the message of those opening 2 episodes is that you should trust people who come into your midst. It feels like clumsiness on the part of Erickson rather than wanting to do that.
I definitely
in the same way that Gatiss, I'm sure, hadn't intended to write. No, I don't think
he set out to write an anti-refugee screed, but just accidentally did so. No, I agree. But I would also say that, and I think the thing that's really interesting about this and sort of sits it, certainly in this little run of stories, is the way that, I mean, the TARDIS crew is complicit here for what happens. They set events in motion. They bring the virus on board. The virus obviously causes a schism, you know, in the society in the first 2 episodes. And then, yeah, as I say, and again, it's really striking to hear about, you know, virus mutations after everyone thinks they're out of the woods, having ramifications years down the line. I mean, that was another thing that made me go, oh, Christ. But... you know, again, the virus mutates, and that creates the opportunity for the monoids to overthrow the humans. So the TARDIS crew is culpable in this. And this sort of brings me back to something I mean, like you, I like Stephen. I think he's, for the most part, written in quite a sort of generic, like, he's the action dude because, you know, this is stuff that Hartnell can't have.
He is exasperated, though. He is exasperated beefcake.
But he's also exasperated beefcake Peter Purvis. That's a
sentence
no one's used on Twitch before. But he's also there to be the Doctor's sort of voice of moral conscience. And I remember, because obviously
his rant at the end of the
massacre. Yeah. So which is the preceding episode to this. He's there laying it out to the Doctor. I found that such a powerful scene when we listened to the massacre, because we can't watch it anymore. Where he's really laying it on the line about how the Doctor's attitude towards like traveling around because he wants to explore history is actually irresponsible for the amount of risk that it puts everyone to.
Yeah.
And right here, I thought it was really interesting when the penny drops and everyone sees that, you know, it's Dodo's cold that's causing this massive problem on the ship and really jeopardized the entire future of humanity. Stephen's first reaction is to ask, well, do you think we've done this before? So, like, have we been spreading germs around other time zones and other planets? And that is, you know, I mean, it's not to say that it's necessarily a thread that, you know, is a part of what they were trying to do with Stephen, but I find it really interesting that it's still on the table at this point, that the Doctor, you know, could at best, you know, be unintentionally causing all sorts of problems, but also at worst is selfish, and, you know, his sort of lust for knowledge and lust for travelling around does put people at risk.
And I thought that was quite interesting as well, how I agree with you completely, and it's just a nice little note that's touched there. I mean, I'm not really aware of what kind of polish Jerry Davies would have put onto these scripts. I do feel that kind of questioning of the Doctor's moral conduct is quite interesting. It's also sometimes done with a lighter touch. So, for example, when the doctors come up with the antidote to this common cold and sort of says, well, I'm going to give that to Stephen and then move on directly to the Guardians. And Dodo asks, in whatever accent she's chosen at that point, I forget which it is, but isn't that a bit dodgy? Like, should we not do some more testing or something? Isn't that a bit dodgy? And the doctor says, my dear, it would be dodgy if I didn't give, And what I like is that he's berated her use of English constantly, and dodgy's quite a sort of slangy kind of word to use, or a bit more vernacular. And he just copies her. It becomes second nature to him to actually accommodate himself to his companions and to their rhythm of speech. And I feel that this really kind of finds its natural conclusion in when he's enjoying the swinging 60s in the underground go-go bar in in the War Machines. But it's like
he gets mistaken for Jimmy Savile, which is
that's a hell of a mistake to make. But I do think that it's interesting how we tend to think of the Doctor's evolution as a character to be more of a New Who concern. And actually, if you take the really crotchety Doctor from the beginning of this era through to now, through to mixing it with the young ones and taking the side of the young ones in the War Machines, you see the evolution of the character. Other people, by the way, and I know that most people watching this will be aware, but most people, other people fluff their lines as much or if not more than Hartnell. It's just the way it's recorded. His performance is very, very solid throughout the whole run of this serial.
And it's commanding. I mean, it's like, I think there's that idea, and we've talked about this at length before, but I think partly it sort of comes through, the more accessible bits of the first Doctor that we see later on, like, him in the Three Doctors, where, he's in a very sorry state, and then obviously the interpretation of his performance that Richard Hurnell gives, which is this idea that he's just this sort of dotty, sort of slightly absentee, and and they had to get characters like Ian
and even
and
unpleasant. I mean, we've discussed it before how Moffat's portrayal of the first Doctor in via David Bradley,
so wide of the mark.
Yeah, I mean, not dissing Bradley, but the way it's written is just so uncomplimentary.
He's such a commanding, powerful performer that he feels in the same way that Tom Baker does. And I think that the amount of presence that a Doctor brings to it is something that we'll definitely be talking about with the other two stories that we're going to talk about tonight.
I do just want to give a quick shout out.
Hartnell is a powerful performer here.
Can I stop you there?
Please do.
I just want to give a shout out to Martin, who MJPO 007. He said never thought about that before. The Doctor and others spreading their germs around time and space. I think, Martin, you and I both know that Stephen has more than spread his germs around. You know what I'm saying?
Are we back to your
that
fan
exasperated beefcake has definitely dipped his cosmic wick. We'll do some more shout-outs later, and we'll try and keep the sexual innuendo
please
at a high level.
Yeah. There's a couple of other things that I just wanted to sort of raise about this, which is that it is... I mean, I do agree that it's a story of two halves, and I think that the second half of it is less interesting. I mean, I think it's considerably less interesting because it is just a bit of a run around with traitors. And, the monoids, I think, sort of get over the line for me as a slightly, as an idea on paper, certainly they work pretty well in the first two episodes.
What do you make of the whole ping pong ball thing?
Yeah, I love that Wikipedia explains in detail that the monoid effects were created by the actor having an eye ping pong ball in the mouth and wearing an elongated wig across the front. You go, oh, really? Is that how they did it? Extraordinary.
Yeah, you could never have... No.
They're a bit chatty later on, which kind of undercuts them somewhat.
I quite like how camp they are. Like,
they're super camp, and they spend a long time explaining their plans to each other, which is always a bit of a giveaway that no one quite knows what they're doing. But one thing I will say is that the Refusion, so the invisible aliens that are on the planet Refusis, who are a third alien race in this, they're invisible, and so just two things I'll say about this. One is that I actually think the invisibility effects are pretty good, and certainly rendered with a lot of fun. With like little plants moving around, and it's done subtly and economically, as if to say, like, you know what's going on here, and there isn't.
I quite like the arse indentation on the leatherette chair, and I did find myself wondering, how did they do that?
Yeah,
it wasn't too bad, right?
No, and it's a nice little touch. It sort of it clues you in without anyone having to go, oh, they're invisible. It's like, as a viewer, it's enough of a shorthand to know what's going on. So I think
there was a leatherette bonquette in the middle of that launcher.
Yeah.
And there was an arse indentation on it.
Yeah, it's beautifully done.
Beautifully done.
But it's also, and again, I think this maybe comes back to some of the sort of more humane sort of aspects of the story writing, that the Refusians as well are now the third race that we see in this whole story who have suffered like an environmental disaster on their planet. They say that they are in this situation now where they've, the planet Refusis needs life, and so they are wanting another race to come, and they're quite up for sharing their space. And then obviously the Earth and the planet that the monoids are from has gone the same way. And there is Go on.
Do you think they took the Gatwick luggage trolley cart with them down to the planet's surface?
Yeah.
Because it was doing a roaring trade up and down the arc, wasn't it?
And you thought, press this thing into service. That and the fax machine that they're using during the court proceedings to do the transcriptions with the piece of paper that comes out of it is a nice touch.
Very nice touch.
But the other thing I'm saying is, like, for me, I think, we're on the same page. I enjoyed this. I definitely think that the first half of it is better than the second half. It is confident with a big idea, and there are lots of big ideas. I mean, first of all, you've got the whole arc idea, which was lifted almost wholesale again when you get to the arc in space, nearly 10 years later. But that is a good punchy sci-fi idea. You've got all of the sort of the miniaturization stuff, but then the effect of the virus, looking for the vaccine, but also how knowledge of the vaccine can be lost, which is another interesting thread. That it's like they cured the common cold, but the information got lost in a war. So you've got this, idea that future societies, like, it's not that everything is being recorded from now. There is crucial information that can be lost. And then you've got the time jump, like forward 700 years in the same location, which, is a very novel idea. It's going for big ideas, this, and big sci-fi ideas. But it's executing them in a way that feels it's not too forced. It's not too OTT. I was also
even
wondering,
the special effects, like the actual like stuff in space.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly crude by modern standards, but it felt oddly more timeless than some of the stuff in the late 70s or 80s. Who, in that it was not trying to be very complicated, right? They just wanted to show the little ships coming away from the big ship, or the statue being pushed out of the launch bay.
Well, the statue's great.
But the design work is wonderful. I mean, right down to that glorious font, the name of which I can never remember, but right down to they got that massive tin of rather disgusting looking vat of chicken wings.
Yes.
And just but the monoid kind of ruling class existence, where I love the shot. And by the way, I think the direction in this by let me get this right.
Michael Emerson, wasn't it?
Yeah, Michael Emerson. Yeah, the direction I think is really good. There's some fantastic crane shots. The jungle at the beginning is really quite nicely rendered. All the wonderful animals. There's an elephant that comes in, and it feels like it's they're really trying to put every pound, shilling, and pence up there on the screen.
Yeah, I mean it's a good jungle set at the start as well.
But the ruling class thing of when there's that beautiful shot of there's a close up of the glass being put on the table. As I say, it amused me because it wasn't entirely clear how the monoid was drinking this. They decided probably quite intelligently not to show that, but they did show putting down that'll be all, that sort of stuff. I loved all that. And then when I think it's monoid, is it? Number 2 takes them down to the planet, and they basically, there's the bit where he gives away that actually all the humans are going to be killed, and Dodo, or the Doctor, says, you meant that all the humans are going to be killed, didn't you? And he goes, no. I mean, I'm not sure that's meant to be funny, but it is very funny. And
I do like Campalian. Yeah, I'd say.
Listen, I'll say this. I think that it's a great morality play in the first 2 episodes. It's a bit by numbers in the second half. I like the ambition of it, but it's got an uneven tone that a better script editor, I think, would have grasped and ironed out. But I applaud the ambition, and I like the design and the brio. And I must say that message in episodes 2 and 4, you must travel with understanding as well as hope, in the Doctor's own words. For me personally, that's what I look for in Doctor Who, and that's what I think is kind of, it's what keeps people being so affectionate about the show. It delivers excitement, horror, fear, but crucially hope.
Now, the next step to getting rid of the common cold and to help you feel much better and to clear up that congestion, what we're going to do, we're going to take an onion. And what you're basically going to do, you're just going to slice up this onion into a whole bunch of pieces. Just going to slice it all up, and get you a little bowl. And put all those slices of onion in the bowl. Then you're going to take the bowl and set it right next to your bed.
Okay. Well, thanks for the advice.
Absolutely. Can't say that we're not delivering important information there.
I mean, that's basically public spirited kind of.
I know.
That's public service broadcasting at its best, isn't it?
That's better than Stay Alert or whatever the replacement was. Anyway.
A couple more shout-outs, because I missed a couple of people.
I like the fact you're monitoring the chat here. I don't think you'd been on Twitch until half an hour ago, ever in your life.
That's true, but I'm now a Twitcher. I twitch uncontrollably. So yeah, big hello to Tom Turlow, one of definitely one of the 2 listeners, and inexplicably proud of it. So big hello to you. Thanks for tuning in. Ernie _did _it. Also hello, and I think we've got Gareth there as well. 1 or 2 ideas from H.G. Wells' Time Machine deployed apparently, and a good observation. That's true, isn't it? Right down to the simpleton Earthlings.
I like the fact that real-time interaction means that we can now give this show the hospital radio vibes. It's always desperately needed.
I mean, you joke, but some of these people could be quite ill. I mean, there's some terrible statistics. Terrible.
That is a very good point. Right, well, should we talk about the next story?
None of you are lying prone at this point, because no, actually, we shouldn't even joke. Right, let's move on. Matt, what's the next serial we're going to put under the mood? I'll explain later, Lens.
Let's brighten the mood by talking about the Caves of Androzani.
Yay!
So this is a story from March 1984. It is the very final Peter Davison story in which... Yeah, I know. So all good things have to come to an end, though, John. And in the Caves of Androzani, the Doctor and his new friend Perry land on the very sort of desert-like planet of Androzani Minor, and soon get caught up in a multi-way power struggle between a group of weapons smugglers, a industrialist on the planet Androzani Major,
Morcus,
and the rogue android maker Sharaz Jek. And they are all involved in a multi-way political, economic, and actually very armed and violent struggle for control of Spectrox, this substance that the future society that they're all from is desperate to keep hold of, which is it's pretty much made out to be the elixir of eternal youth, isn't it? People drink it in order to stay young. It's a very valuable commodity. And the authorities on Androzani Major are complicit with this private organisation that's running a lot of the mining operations in order to keep the prices high and keep the people buying. Amidst all of this, the Doctor and Perry turn up on Androzani Minor. Perry has a slight stumble and falls into a Spectrox nest, which causes both the Doctor and Perry to become infected with Spectrox poisoning. and there is only one cure, which is very hard to find. Pretty much everything unspools from there, but it's not spoiling much.
Who hasn't milked a bat in their time? Am I right, Matt?
No. Such a shame that we don't get that prolonged sequence of a very ill Peter Davison milking a bat, but there we go.
Yeah, I have to say, I suspect that there is an extended. They're probably.
Oh, when that hits Blu-ray.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they talk about whether televisions are HD ready. I am so ready for HD when they find that particular piece of VT, because I bet the teat was rendered in really high definition, and
this is why our stream is flagged as being for mature audiences only.
Yeah.
Or immature. But anyway, it's fair to say that Caves of Androzani has an extremely good reputation.
Written, of course, by
Robert Holmes, directed by original series sort of legend Graham Harper, who
also directed one of my favourite pieces of television. Not this, but the Inside Number 9 episode, Bernie Clifton's dressing room.
Yes, and was a frequent director on the new series as well. So yeah, it's fair to say that this has got an extremely good reputation, frequent poll topper. It's often, certainly in terms of how the classic series stories are ranked, it's often vying really, I mean, its only competition seems to be Genesis of the Daleks and Talons of Weng-Chiang. And as more people in the world awaken to the realisation that Talons of Weng-Chiang is horrifically racist, I think there's an opportunity here for Caves of Androzani to seal the deal. So, bit of a classic, but if anyone can piss on that particular bonfire, I'll explain later. So I'm now going to ask you, John, what did you think of the Caves of Androzani?
So, I had seen this before, and so I didn't come cold to this, as it were. I didn't come cold to this, but I did. I had a very sort of lasting impression of it, and indeed, I think I watched it with you, Matt.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was quite familiar with it, and I did, of course, watch it again for this, and I found myself in a real quandary with this, because especially directly off the back of, I did watch them in this order. I watched The Ark, then I watched Androzani, then I watched Heaven Sent, the third of the stories that we'll be discussing. And I've just come off that. We ended that segment with me, sort of saying that you must travel with understanding as well as hope is kind of that's the thing I really like and look for in Doctor Who. Not that everything should be cloyingly sweet or saccharine or tied with a bow, but the Doctor is, if nothing, a search for the opportunity, the way through it, the hope. And yeah, he saves his companion, but this is unrelentingly grim.
Yes.
It's not even funereally grim, as many people would say of, I think,
Logopolis,
yeah.
Or even something like Planet of the Spiders, which once it sort of gets into the business of the Doctor dying, it does go to a pretty dark place.
Yeah, but even that has a kind of redemptive arc, doesn't it? Like he's cleansing his soul before the next period. I mean, I know that there's that whole sort of Buddhist vibe that's going on there. There's really no hope in any of this. Not really any. I read a comment. I can't remember where, but I read a comment that it's only Android. It's only Timin, the lady who takes over as the head of the conglomerate.
Yeah. And
the android Salatine character who survive, other than the Doctor and the companion. Every other person you see.
I mean, if we're going to split hairs, the Doctor dies, which is...
Well, yeah, exactly. So, only Perry, Timin, and the Salatine or android trapped in a burning building, whose fate is perhaps secured, but... I'm sure the fan fiction would say otherwise. So it's unrelentingly grim. It's a very intelligently put together piece of television, and I think it's hugely interesting and indeed important as a kind of record of the debates at the time. This was broadcast between the 8th of March and the 16th of March 1984, and just 3 days before that first air date was the very first of the miners' strike actions. First wave of workers not turning up to work in the coal miners' strike of 84-85. And clearly this was written and even shot before any of that action took place, but the debates about it and the currents of a government riding on the wave of patriotic fervour, particularly in the wake of the Falklands War, the mix of, because government was very implicated in industry, because there were still lots of nationalised industries, the intersection between corporate power, government power, union power, and the possibility of those at the heads of any of those institutions to kind of manipulate people into things against their interests. It's a fascinating bit at in the latter part of the first episode, where the president of the Concilium and the and Morgus, the sort of business magnate, are discussing the difference between a businessman's patriotism and a politician's patriotism.
Yeah.
And they're both, Morgus is trying to say he's acting in a very patriotic way, despite the fact that he's obviously playing both sides in the war that he's kind of funding to push up commodity prices. But when they're talking about that patriotism, the businessman's patriotism, or the politician's patriotism, it's both very much through the prism of how people can be manipulated for their own ends. There's no patriotism of the common good.
No.
There's no patriotism of the collective and what's in the good for those around them.
Well, and strikingly, the people of Androzani, presumably this society, is almost completely absent. I mean, we see it very much through its mercenaries and its political class and its industrialists. But I think that Robert Holmes, Robert Holmes does something that he's very good at. But I think also, I don't give 80s Who a lot of credit. And I do think that one of the things that is really interesting about 80s Who, and perhaps Eric Saywood deserves some credit for this, is the kind of depiction of some of those seedier underbellies of life. Soldiers or mercenaries scratching an existence, throwing dice to each other, people stuck in positions they would probably rather be out of. There is perhaps that was just a mark of the times, well, that's
maybe
the thing.
We shouldn't necessarily blame them just for that.
Well, no, it's interesting that you sort of mention Saywood there, because I think obviously this is
some of Sharaz Jek's fruitier language feels like a Saywood injection.
Yeah, but also I think even if, and this is the thing, it's like, I guess just to lay my cards on the table, I think this is very good. Like, in terms of doing what it does, I think the story it tells is interesting. I think it's well executed. It's well written. I think for the limitations of classic Doctor Who, it's extremely well directed, and that's something that
I think Harper deserves credit there.
And I think also across the board, the performances are very good, for the most part. So I think it is very good, and I think it stands out in its era. Against a lot of very sort of half-baked and annoying and sort of rote Doctor Who that's doing Doctor Who-y things for the sake of just being Doctor Who, of just getting more episodes out. And I think for better or worse, like, this definitely works, and it works well. The big but is that I agree that, like, I don't particularly want Doctor Who to be like this.
Yeah, for me, I just feel identically about this as I do with Vengeance on Varos. It's interesting. It's clever. I find it a sort of good watch, and Doctor Who 6389 has written in to say, everyone dies in Horror of Fang Rock 2, and it's star great. I think that's probably fucking great. Same with Androzani. If Doctor Who did this every week, okay, that would be weird. But when nothing else in season 21 was like this, is telling a grittier tale a real issue? I don't think so. Your mileage may vary. I certainly think that's a valid opinion. But
to be honest, I sort of agree
to be like this, and especially, I take issue, for example, with Horror of Fang Rock, because yes, okay, that's grim as well. But there's a there's a theatrical camp hammer horror kind of mystique to it that gives it a patina of distance. There's no distance here. Indeed, you mentioned Graham Harper's direction. It feels so claustrophobic.
It's
There's
deeply
so many
claustrophobic,
beautiful
deeply
tight
uncomfortable.
close-ups that he uses to really give you a sense of how tense this is.
But
and
sorry,
the number,
just to jump-
the machine gun fire, Matt.
I mean, it's relentless. It's absolutely relentless wall-to-wall machine gun fire, which obviously stands out even more because they're using those sort of old BBC cameras that as soon as a gunshot goes off in the studio, like you get all those lines across the screen. And that's happening all the time, which kind of really just drives it home.
Which actually does. I mean, I to be fair, that kind of gives you that visceral sense of it. It's not necessarily a bad thing, that, but
the Fang Rock comparison is a really interesting one, I think, because I mean, yes, it's an anomaly, but it's in an anomaly where, I mean, obviously it's the start of the Graham Williams era, which, you know, as we said, that the sort of things start to kind of go off the boil a bit across his era. But it's certainly in terms of what has consistently led up to that point, Doctor Who is routinely like really good and trying different things every week and is incredibly well executed. I mean, this is, I think, sort of comfortably the best and the best executed story of its season, in that really it stands out around everything among it, because it literally hits that, you know, it is attempting to do something interesting and it is well executed. It doesn't have that sort of baseline of tedium or incompetence, essentially, that everything else surrounding it has.
no, I think it succeeds in its ambition to do something interesting. It's just
And I think that's the thing. It would maybe stand out if it was like an exceptionally good story in a very varied season that gave you like hit after hit after hit, as the Tom Baker era kind of often did, you know, at its peak. Then I think maybe it would stand out a bit less. But I think the fact that it sort of rises above so much of what was done in the Peter Davison era, and, you know, particularly in terms of the era that sort of follows, it sort of blinds you a bit to the fact that, so you know, what if all of the other stories, which weren't being like unrelentingly grim and nihilistic and cynical, were also delivered to that level of execution? What could we have had? And that's when it becomes a bit frustrating, because I think it is extremely good, but I think it's unrepresentative both of what Doctor Who is, or particularly sort of what I want it to be. To loop it back to what you're saying about the Eric Sayward point, I think this is the show that Eric Sayward wants to make. And I think, you know, and this is probably the closest he comes to executing his vision of Doctor Who, you know, because he has a great team around him. He's got a great writer and he's got a great director, and they can really make good on what he wants Doctor Who to be at this point.
And I'm guessing there's quite a lot of influence from Blake Seven here as well, because I feel like that was also pushing in that more, perhaps for an older demographic slightly as well. I get the
sort
impression
of anti-hero kind of grim, dark, sort of underclass kind of underworld sort of vibes, like sort of.
I mean, I wouldn't want to give any kind of impression that I'm a Blake Seven kind of expert at all. I haven't actually really watched hardly any of it. But yeah, you know, it's of a piece with that kind of tone, or perhaps taking that tone one step further. I can even actually see, if I squint a little, I can sort of see, you know, when you think about the development of thinking about other children's sort of audiovisual or even written children's fiction, the Harry Potter series, or the difference between, say, Frozen 1 and Frozen 2, the Disney animation films. There's a clear intent by the authors there, whether for Harry Potter it's the, you know, J.K. Rowling, or the film series, or, you know, Disney in the case of Frozen 1, Frozen 2. There's a stated intention to grow up with the audience.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether there is a kind of conscious decision by Sayward, at the very least, to reflect that maybe some of the children who've grown up with the show want to move in a slightly more serious direction, want to have greater engagement with the grim miseries of early and mid 80s Britain. And insofar,
I think you
if
could
that's
read that. I think that's charitable.
I think if that's the intention, you certainly get several. I mean, I don't think there's sufficiently. Perhaps I'm being too charitable, but I feel like that if they wanted to do that, this is the kind of Doctor Who they would be making. I just think it's a mistake for Doctor Who to go too far in this direction. And both this and Vengeance on Varos, which I think are they are really almost companion pieces, the way that they touch on quite similar themes. There's no hope
and make them
there.
work, crucially.
Yeah, there's actually even a little bit of hope in Vengeance on Varos. They at least abolish the death penalty at the end of it. There's no hope here.
The society's vaguely liberated at the end of Vengeance.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about as well, because Robert Holmes did Sunmakers as well, right?
Yes.
And Lewis Baston, I presume, is listening, a former guest in this parish, and a fantastic cephalogical mind, and a Doctor Who nerd. And he has written a beautiful, beautiful long piece about the politics and the socioeconomic sort of context of the Sunmakers, much more intelligently than we did when we discussed it. But he's very much of an opinion with me that the Sunmakers is often seen, because of a couple of crass jokes about tax bills at the beginning, it's seen as a right-wing thing. Actually, the revolution is that it's the most Marxist that Doctor Who becomes. Violently, Marxist-Leninist almost, is a violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie. But at least there's a kind of hope lies with the proles kind of. There's the hope, at least, that out of the ashes of that they've pushed to a power, maybe they could do something different with it. The Doctor even has one of those corny lines like, now make a better job of what you do next. There's none of that here. And I think it's intelligent. I think it's interesting. I think it's let down by, personally, I don't have a great deal of investment in Peter Davison's portrayal of the Doctor. It doesn't really touch the sides for me. I think much has been written. I know Elizabeth Sandifer has written about, is Robert Holmes really writing the voice with the voice of Tom Baker in his head? Yeah. Because some of the quips are quite Baker-esque. I like how they are slightly hollow in Davison's sort of effectively elegiac sort of performance. I don't think he's necessarily doing a bad job, but they don't land the characterization, and little things begin to annoy me. I mean, we'll talk about the mythology of the Doctor in the discussion on Heaven Sent, I'm sure. But the little fucking question marks on the car, all of that, the way he looks, how goofy that setup is, and the get-up is, kind of doesn't work in this gritty, verite kind of environment that you've got. No, not at all. It still jars a bit.
And that, I guess, in a way, because, I mean, there's an extent to which, like, regeneration stories are there to sort of dismantle the character of the Doctor to introduce sort of a new one. And, if you think to the way that's sort of made explicit in Planet of the Spiders, which is all about, the third Doctor, the most sort of swaggering of the Doctors, confronting his ego and his sort of wanderlust. And then Legopolis, where you have sort of the most sort of charismatic and quick-witted of the Doctors. By this point, he's sort of reduced to this absolutely morbid funereal state. And here it's like, you're throwing Davison into a context that, he very much feels out of his depth. And I also think it's worth noting that this whole thing sort of unspools like tragedy. It's not, I mean, ultimately the Doctor has, he sacrifices himself at the end because there isn't enough of the antidote to go round for two. But it unspools as classical tragedy because it's basically a bunch of fuck-ups that then just have continually unspooling consequences. It's very casual the way they both sort of trip up and get their legs covered in the cobwebs that ultimately, poison him and certainly need her rescuing. I quite
like the fact that it's literally that the companion falls arse over tit. That's it. I quite like that. It's a bit like in the Aztecs at the beginning where it's just, they get locked away from the TARDIS, boom. I quite like that simple conceit.
It's super casual, and then the sort of the growing consequences of that kind of are laid more and more kind of intensely bare throughout the rest of the story. And ditto the fact that there is only, it's a dramatic sort of contrivance, of course, but, it's just very, very bad luck that he can only get enough antidote for one of them, and therefore, his real act of heroism is to not have it himself. Whereas presumably, if he'd managed to get 2 doses, they'd all be, fine and dandy. But it's very much, I think, about sort of collapsing this you know, for want of a better phrase, it's like the Davison Doctor is the nice Doctor, and so to round, you know, to see in a context him die, it needs to be in a situation that kind of overpowers him, and so it has to be, in a sense, the darkest and most funereal and tragic of circumstances. You know, it's not a heroic final gesture that he makes. It's a bunch of silly fuck ups that result in him dying. And I think Davison, I personally, you know, like you, I don't particularly rate Davison, but I like him in this because I think that sort of growing intensity of a man who knows that the gig's up at this point, you know, and particularly it's sort of widely praised, the cliffhanger at the end of episode 3 where he crashes the ship because he reckons he's got nothing left to live for. And I have to, you know, hang my hat with the majority on that one. I think he is good in this because I think it gives him something at least more dramatic to work with. You know, he's the nice man. You know, it's almost it's sort of falling down kind of vibe to it, of like he's the man who's
the Michael Douglas film.
Yeah, he's the man who's now just pushed too far, and it you know,
I just want to have my breakfast and see my daughter.
Yeah. And he doesn't care anymore, and he's got nothing left to live for.
I do agree, actually. You know, coming back to Elizabeth Sandifer's point about who, if anybody doesn't know, I'm sure most of the people listening to this do, but is a kind of Doctor Who critic. You know, she's written about how, as I say, this thing about it was Robert Holmes really sort of writing with the voice of Tom Baker. What I quite like about Davison's performance is the quips, which are quite annoying against the grim backdrop of what's going on at first. A bit like the catchphrase humour of the Fast Show in reverse.
Yeah.
They start being, in the Caves of Androzani, they start being annoying, then they become a little bit funny, and then they get hollower and hollower until the quips become sort of quite sad and meaningful.
Sort of
and
nihilistic as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so I actually do think that I suspect that in the script they were meant to be quips, and Davison's performance turns them into something more sinister or something darker.
Yeah.
So I want to give him his dues. I just don't think that over his run they've really landed the characterization, and that does to a certain extent colour. You know, if they put John Pertwee through that, I'd be in bits because I care so much about that Doctor and the characterization of him and all that.
You know, and the extent to which, you know, in the end of time, where, you know, again, like obviously the new series regenerations really do go for the heroic send off. You know, the standing up and go, you know, it's a powerful act of like giving yourself up, as opposed to the slightly more sort of passive original series regenerations, which tend to be someone falling down and dying. But you know, there's the idea that, you know, David Tennant, this sort of well-loved, nice character, and he's like bloodied and bruised by the end of time. It's like, you're right. For me, the frustrations of it, because it's like, I have to agree, like the basic facts of this are that this probably is one of the best stories of the Davison era. I think there's no two ways about that. But I think that's because the Davison era is sort of largely terrible. And so you end up in this situation where its crowning achievement is very, very unrepresentative. And I suppose if you think of it from the point of view of, like, you know, if you're new to classic Doctor Who and you think, okay, I want to watch some of the classic series, there's like hundreds of them, what am I going to watch? And you go down the list of stories. Okay, Genesis of the Daleks, that is a stone cold brilliant place to start. But Talons, discussed that previously. But you know, you get to Androzani, you're going to watch that, and it's so unrepresentative of its era, and it's so unrepresentative of the show, but it stands there as being like what it sets out to do. It does extremely well. The other thing, and I slightly, this is an issue that I sometimes have with the acclaim that certain Doctor Who stories can get is that they kind of create this feedback loop of like, well, what if it was like that all the time? If you take something like Blink, for example, which is a classic, I'm going to say that, and you end up once the question starts being asked, like, well, what if Doctor Who could be like that all the time? What you get is the Matt Smith era, which is like, for me, doesn't really work, because I think it's trying to do those kind of tricks, but with less of the control. And I slightly think that a lot of the Colin Baker era is going like, well, Androzani worked, so this is what we're going to do now. And so you have horrible stuff like, obviously forget that Twin Dilemma is part of the same series as this, so Twin Dilemma follows on straight away, and it's been observed that Androzani episode 4 into the Twin Dilemma episode 1 is probably the single biggest drop off in quality week on week that the show has ever had.
Yeah, right.
But then you look at the first story of the following season, Attack of the Cybermen, which is empty, vapid nonsense. Essentially, it doesn't work dramatically, it doesn't work conceptually.
So much so that we've taken a clip from that as the end of every episode that we record.
Yeah. But but has all of the sadism, all of your mercenary characters. There's a point where it's just like episode 4 of Androzani is largely men machine gunning each other at point blank range. Yeah, and it's like, so my wife sort of wandered in and out while I was watching this, but she was sort of saying, "What time did this go out? Because this is punishing stuff."
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like Mary Whitehouse, but I found myself thinking the same thing, and I sort of it's really fascinating. I was thinking about all those moments in Doctor Who that I cherish, and I was really pleased. I'd never seen the arc, and it gave me a new one. Even in a serial that had its ups and downs. That bit about you must travel with understanding as well as hope. It feels to me that's kind of what I want Doctor Who to be, and I because the cards on the table, it is a children's television program, and I want it to be a children's television program. I want to watch it with the eyes of a child. I want to go back to my childhood. I want to be able to watch it.
One day I'd like to watch it with my child.
Yeah, exactly. Me too.
It's like that will be a nice moment. Now I'm a dad,
and actually, it was quite interesting that when the arc was on, my toddler ran in, and I didn't think of it. I wouldn't have wanted to. I would have had to pause it and stop it if it was Caves of Androzani. Now, I'm not saying it should be a program that a toddler, we'll talk about Heaven Sent, and that's plenty scary in places. But, there's just something, I don't want Doctor Who to be this. I like it. I think it's interesting. It's intellectually interesting. The direction is fantastic. I do just want to mention one or two shots.
Yeah, let's talk about the direction.
Because I really think Graham Harper, it's a limited budget, and there are limited actors, and and I think it's really amazing. I've talked already about the claustrophobia and the close-ups, and also the use of depth, like someone in the foreground, someone in the background. That a lot with Shellac, and
that is one of those tricks. I always describe that as kind of it's a slightly EastEnders thing where you can imagine, you think of like sort of classic like Grant Mitchell and Tiffany having conversations where the camera's pointing through a doorway and he's in the foreground and then she's standing behind, and you can sort of see over the shoulder, John, that beer's going everywhere over the table. It's very distracting. But
this is one of your beers, by the way.
Thank you. As has been pointed out a few times, all of those conversations where they're playing with the depth of field of like Shellac talking to Salatine, who's standing behind him over his shoulder, they look great as shots for dialogue, but they don't actually make any sense, because when you look at the reverse, Shellac has obviously just got his face pressed up against a wall and he's talking like point blank into a wall in order for that
I know.
But it does look great.
But I don't care about that, because it's an artistic conceit, and and you see
precious few of those in 80s Doctor Who.
I think it's well done, and I think that the claustrophobia of it is worth that kind of slight. I do think that Morgus does one too many sotto voce asides.
Well, apparently that was an accident. Like the actor, like John Normington, misunderstood the direction he was being given, so kept turning the camera to do his sort of quips. And Harper liked it so much that he kept them in. But yeah, he does sort of break the fourth wall. It's like,
but I was reading that John
fun.
Normington, who of course played Morgus, he trod the boards, believe it or not. Was an RSC member and all the rest of it, and you feel a bit of the Richard III, and it's not an original observation, but I think if anything, he probably provides the most boo-hiss fun. There's not much fun in this story, and his villain,
just villainy.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not quite camp enough to be pantomime, and he's too nasty to be convincingly pantomime. But there's just a hint of it, and it is a bit more fun. But there's one shot in particular that I think is amazing in episode 2. There's a part where Sharaz Jek, we haven't talked much about, but his lust for Perry is very uncomfortable, and it's
Deeply.
laid on perhaps a little thick, but it's very uncomfortable, and is meant to be uncomfortable. It's not unintentionally uncomfortable, it is meant to be uncomfortable. But there's a shot where he is faded into a shot of Morgus, and you realise that Morgus, sort of representing the corporate interest and with his corruption and power, reach of his power into politics, and Sharaz Jek, who's kind of not representing the workers, that would be going too far, but he's sided with them as their creator and has the androids facing them. They're kind of two sides of the, if you look at it from a class-based analysis, they're kind of on both sides of it. And the way that fading shot kind of conflates their fanaticism, that both of them are fanatics in their way. It's a very neat shot. It's just nicely done. And
there's a couple of good editing tricks that sort of stood out a little bit in the way that sort of classic Doctor Who sort of tends to be paced in terms of scenes, and then a scene finishes in one location, the music sort of rises to a kind of da-da-da-da-dum climax, and then you're somewhere else for a different scene. Whereas here, it's almost like he does sort of, Harper does do those sort of cuts between locations with music running continually underneath that gives you that sort of sense of, it's almost like montage, or that kind of that there is simultaneous action going on in a few places at the same time. And it definitely feels, Harper's innovations here versus the previous directors who were working here was that he didn't direct from the gallery. He directed from the floor. He got the cameras down off the pedestals where possible, and went for sort of handheld, like up close shooting, which is where that sort of claustrophobia really comes from. And that is how television is made these days. And I think it's sort of, I find it really interesting that he was the only classic series director who was still worth calling up to go and do the new series, where there was budget there, and and increasingly you certainly do see, in the context of the new series, Harper's work for that feels a bit more sort of straight down the line, whereas you see, let's be blunt, younger, fresher directors doing much more innovative stuff in the new era. But what that
I will say is his Inside Number 9 direction is very good, and not just in the kind of pastiche episode, the kind of Hammer horror episode, the Christmas episode with Jessica Raine that he directed, which is amazing. But as I say, in Bernie Clifton's Dressing Room, which if no one has seen it, I think it's the best half hour of British television ever made. It's certainly very good, and I would recommend watching it. But I think I don't think he's lost his touch at all. I agree that his New Who stuff is a bit more pedestrian by comparison to, even the likes of Rachel Talalay, who we're going to talk about later. But I think he's very good in this. And
because basically the rest of television catches up to him in the meantime. He's bringing. He is, where possible, bringing cinematic shooting techniques to studio, proscenium arch, multi-camera, shot as live TV drama.
And And I would say
huge difficulty.
that is one of many qualities in this. And Robert Holmes has done an amazing job to bring so many different live socio-political themes. And we haven't even talked about Stotts or the mercenaries and everything. You know, he does so well to bring all these kind of themes together, tie them with a bow. The direction is fabulous. But again, when I come back to thinking about, you know, you must travel with understanding as well as hope, I think about the Doctor telling Victoria about grief and how to handle it. I think about also with the Doctor and a companion in a jail scene, you know, the way that Pertwee is with Joe Grant in The Time Monster. I think of those tender moments which would have been possible to deliver in this story, and those tender moments full of hope and a lightness of touch and some degree of fun. That's kind of what I look for in Doctor Who, and there really isn't any of that in this. So for that reason, I think it's good, but I wouldn't want much more of Doctor Who.
It's not right.
No, it's good, but it's not. No, it's sorry, Roy Walker. I was thinking Whitney Houston. Yeah. You were thinking Roy Walker, and you were right. It's good, but it's not right.
So can we just have... So just coming off chatting about the direction, it's worth chatting because, I mean, this is a regeneration story, and so it finishes with a regeneration.
Die, Doctor!
Yeah, so it's interesting that the sort of the two major regenerations of the John Nathan Turner era are... I think they sometimes get a bit of stick for being somewhat more sort of indulgent and... Stylized, I think, than the ones that came before. I don't know, to be honest. I think, like, let's be honest. The actual the lead up to it is absolutely brilliant, but the actual regeneration sequence from John Pertwee into Tom Baker is dull as dishwater. It is the most boring utilitarian crossfade ever. You know, I like the attempt to give it a bit more welly.
Oh, me too. But I think that's well done.
I also think it's a bit more interesting than just the sort of the nostalgia fest that this is kind of written off as. I mean, you know, it's been observed elsewhere, but I find it such a beautiful little trick that sort of vortex effect that you see during the regeneration sequence when the Doctor is piloting the ship at the end of episode 3 and he starts to black out and you start to see those graphics kind of start to come up and it's like it's starting, which is right there with, you know, in the new series whenever the Doctor looks down at his hand and it's glowing a bit yellow and you sort of know what's coming. It's a beautiful bit of foreshadowing there, albeit something that you would probably miss on the first viewing if you didn't know what the regeneration sequence looked like.
Yeah.
But I also think in the dramatic context of this story, there's something quite cathartic about it, where everything is so grim and so tense and everything is so sort of stripped down and everyone is speaking in such a clipped way that to have a cackling Anthony Ainley giant face filling the screen, you know, giving it hell for leather 100%, you know, it's sort of... And no one's going to stand here and say, you know, Anthony Ainley is such a great actor, but it is that sort of cathartic burst of like OTT-ness that the preceding 4 episodes need, and that sort of is, even though, you know, you're rapidly reminded that the Colin Baker era is just around the corner when Colin Baker sits up and, you know, immediately starts snarking off on Perry. That nevertheless it does need that moment of the Doctor just pausing, you know, remembering old friends. I mean, it's like he's once again reminded that Adric died on his watch, and there is an element of guilt that he has to come to terms with there. But yeah, just a cackling manic Anthony Ainley is the sort of last thing we see. I think is like dramatically welcome and worthwhile in this.
Totally.
What do you think?
I'm just down for any appearance by Anthony Ainley.
True.
And, you know, it was, and we got to see Adric and Turlo and Nyssa. So it was nice to have something that I wanted to see on the screen in Anthony Ainley.
Today, the focus of the picketing by the striking miners moved to Scotland, to the Ravenscraig steelworks, and the focus of the police moved with them. To the miners, the police are the sword of the government, a force being used to defeat their strike. To the police, they're the shield of the public, defending the right to go to work of those who don't want to strike.
That's Reggie Burnett, isn't it?
It's a Burnett. I couldn't remember which one.
I seem to remember him being one of the puppets on Spitting Image. Please write in and confirm that was Reggie Burnett. Someone.
I'm sure someone in the chat will let us know. I'll keep eyes peeled.
So, shall we move on?
Yeah, let's move on. So we're on to our final story that we're talking about tonight. John, tell us what we've been watching.
So, 52 years into the show's run, we get, on the 28th of November 2015, Heaven Sent.
Sorry, Tom Turlow's confirmed it's Alistair Burnett.
Alistair Burnett, damn it. Yeah. I'm thinking of Reggie Bosanquet, aren't I? Sorry, everybody. Alistair Burnett. You're quite right. You're quite right.
I like the
10
live
points.
fact-checking that we can now do now that we're doing this live.
Martin has written in and asked very kindly, for you, Matt, what's the second beer that I'm drinking? The first, of course, was German Helles Classic Augustiner from Munich. And this is pretty decent milk stout, which is brewed by you, Matt, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons behind the 18-month hiatus is the career change of quitting the TV industry and going off to run a brewery. But we can talk about that on Twitter later. The people are here to hear our hot takes on Doctor Who, John, not to hear me shamelessly plug my day job. And
if you've organised the brewery and the drinking of beer within it, as well as you've organised the video links this evening, you will be onto a winner. So we were talking about
Heaven Sent.
Heaven Sent. Yeah, 52 years into the show's run, Heaven Sent, New Who Series 9. Capaldi, obviously, is the Doctor, Peter Capaldi, and this was written, of course, by Stephen Moffat, directed by Rachel Talalay, and it's, I think, possibly, I don't know whether there have been polls or of the same kind of import as there were when Caves of Androzani was repeatedly in the top 3.
Oh, you can't move for polls these days.
But this one is almost unimpeachable. It's very, very highly regarded.
Yes.
And to sum up the previous episode, it's very difficult to sort of take this one away from the previous episode and the episode that comes after. So the previous episode, Face the Raven, in which Clara Oswald is killed by a bird, and the following episode, Hellbent, in which Peter Capaldi seeks revenge on those who have annoyed him. Killed her. Yeah, and so which turns out to be the Time Lords, and this one is in the middle where he is effectively being interrogated, although he doesn't realise that at first. But essentially, this story is Groundhog Day without the jokes. So he basically finds himself going through the same circle
or
of
Sonny and Cher
again and again. I mean, okay, so they don't use the kind of Guantanamo-esque torture techniques that are employed against Bill Murray, but nonetheless, he finds himself in this prison, and he eventually works out that he's been there several times before, and will indeed turn out to have been there several times afterwards. It's a claustrophobic, worrying, existential, deep dive into the Doctor's soul, and very, very well regarded, as I say. Quite,
largely a
very
one-hander.
gothic. Sorry?
A one-hander from Peter Capaldi. That wasn't an innuendo.
I'm not sure. I'm not. That's probably maybe in the cut you've seen.
I haven't. That doesn't sound right now that I'm saying it.
It really doesn't.
Single-hander?
Quite apart from anything else.
He's the only character in it.
Well, I mean, there's a little bit of Clara.
Yes.
And there is the kind of the ghost of Christmas yet to come.
Yes.
Which looms around a bit.
From the Muppet version, of course.
Yes, of course. And there of the flies as well.
Yes.
Who do a bit of a turn.
Uncredited.
But yeah, I think it's fair to say that this is considered very highly. As is traditional, I've done the introduction and set the scene. I shall pass the gauntlet to you, Matt. What did you think of Heaven Sent, and why?
Well, thank you for asking. So I guess just sort of coming off the bat, I mean, we looked at, like, in the very early days of the podcast, we looked at Mummy on the Orient Express. But other than that, this is sort of, we've not looked at any Peter Capaldi stories other than that. And I think it's because we made a format decision quite early on that it's more interesting for us and how we talk about Doctor Who to look back at an era when the dust has settled, rather than to be sort of giving a real-time commentary on the state of the show as it is. And that's something that we'll stick to. So, we're not going to be getting onto any of the Jodie Whittaker stories until, certainly a couple of years after she's finished in the role.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is, seriously, especially when there's a change of creative team in Doctor Who, the eras tend to, because everyone wants to make a fresh start, and obviously it makes commercial sense for Doctor Who to be relaunched. Eras kind of define themselves in reaction to the previous one.
Yeah.
And that is quite a good way of then looking back and seeing what did and didn't work about those eras. That's a slightly long way around to say, like, okay, so this, I think, we're going to be talking about Heaven Sent, but I think we are also going to be talking about the Peter Capaldi run, because that's not something that we've ever really talked about in much detail versus the Matt Smith era or the Russell T Davies stories.
Yeah.
And I think it's also fair to say that, as a podcast, like, there's a certain expectation that I think we are quite down on Stephen Moffat as well. It's like, I think we've been very
Broadly, yeah.
been very critical of him, constructively so, but very critical of him. But in my case, and I think this might be where you and I start to sort of part company on this, that is largely confined to the Matt Smith era, because I really like the Peter Capaldi run.
Yeah.
I think it's three series that run the gamut large. I mean, there are episodes that misfire and don't work, but I think all three series are, hit a baseline of being good, and I think, in places rise to sort of very good and outstanding. And it's sort of interesting that it's... What I like about them is that they do sort of make good on a lot of the work that has been done in the Matt Smith era that doesn't quite land. It's these episodes, it's not... I mean, Moffat definitely does take a different approach with Capaldi. The pace is significantly reduced of the episode, so scenes have a chance to breathe rather than being bang bang bang, now we're in the future, now there's a spaceship, whoa, kind of things. People talk in dialogue rather than just in memes that are designed to be printed on a t-shirt. There's a significantly reduced amount of banter in these episodes, which I find I'm very grateful for. There's a much more stable creative team behind it. So Brian Minchin is the co-exec producer throughout the run of throughout all three series, versus the revolving door of execs that they had throughout the Matt Smith era, which is not just sort of inside baseball. It kind of that stuff does come out on screen. I think partly because of the slightly chaotic nature of the production inevitably makes it to screen, but also I think that the massive handbrake turns that the direction of the show takes between series, between all three seasons of the Matt Smith era. Here I think there's a very focused... It's 3 years where they're gonna settle on a tone. They'll do different things with it each year, but also crucially, I think it's Moffat finally making his ideas work. I think his general approach remains the same. He is at heart, a postmodernist. He's interested in stories that are engineered as much as they are told. He's interested in playing with the idea, storytelling about storytelling. He's interested in that sort of metafictional conceit. And if that is an absolute non-starter for you as an idea, then there's as little for you in the Capaldi era, I think, as there was in the Matt Smith era. But for me, those ideas have benefited from to use a brewing analogy, a bit more time in the tank. You know, they're properly conditioned. It's like he's able to execute these things and do them confidently. So we see the Moffat bag of tricks come out time and time again throughout the Capaldi era, but they work and they're satisfying in the way that they were when he was guest writing for the Russell T Davies era. I think Clara is a very Marmite companion, and I don't think I think Bill is a much more successful character. What I would say is that I think something smart is done in between the Matt Smith era and the Capaldi era, which is to essentially have Jenna Coleman play a completely different character that also has the same name as Clara, where they completely rewrite the backstory. She can be, I think, the weak link from time to time, but I think there is also an attempt to do something interesting and dramatic with her story across the two years. You know, there's an attempt to develop that character versus, again, all of the sort of handbrakes with Amy Pond that, you know, oh, she's lost a baby, but then she's wisecracking, and then she's an international model for some reason, and then she's not, and, you know, all of this kind of stuff. So, like, in general, I think it works. Also, I think there's a refreshed creative team, you know, on both sides of the camera. There's new writers who I think are really good, like Sarah Dollard. I think he's a great writer. Peter Harness, for me, like, get this man running the show as far as I'm concerned. I love Peter Harness, and I think, you know, there's definite future showrunner there.
They certainly harnessed his talents.
Smooth. There's even an attempt to sort of course correct on some of the sort of slightly questionable sort of boys' club attitude that you get in the Matt Smith era, that there are women writing for the show and there are women directing it as well, including Rachel Talalay, who, you know, comes back to direct the finales of all of the Peter Capaldi shows and series, and for my money is the best director on the modern series.
Did you like this?
Yes, I thought this was outstanding, but that's the long way. That was a long way round, but
the long way round.
The long way round. To cap it all, what the Capaldi series has going for it is one of Britain's best character actors playing his dream role, and that, you know, that really comes across. What you have here then is all of that talent boiled down to its three core elements. You've got a writer, director, star. It's a real high wire at this sort of single-hander, if that is the correct term, because
solo palm. I think it's called a solo palm.
Solo palm, fine. For this particular solo palm, you need all three of those people at the top of their game. You need Moffat, you know, actually delivering the goods rather than sort of half-baked grab bag of ideas, which you could accuse him of. You need the direction to be on point and the pacing to be, and, you know, it's a lot to put on an actor, and so you need the doctor to step up here. And for me, I think this just absolutely sings. I think I can see a world in which, you know, it's just another Moffat puzzle box, blah blah blah. But yeah, I love this. I think this is phenomenal. John.
So on the subject of the Capaldi era, I would agree with a couple of the comments that have just come in on the chat board, the fan chat, as I said I would call it. I'm sticking to that. So Vashti says the Bill season, so that'd be season 10, the one following season 9, obviously. The Bill season is the only one I've rewatched from Capaldi, and I have to say that I find, for reasons which I will explain, I completely agree. I think series 10 is far and away the most successful, not only of the Capaldi, but indeed of the entire Moffat run.
I think I agree.
And I think it's largely because sort of it was not intended, and therefore, you know, he'd closed his, you know, he'd opened Pandora's box, the Pandora. He'd opened up that box of tricks. He'd put everything back in again. He was kind of signed off and wanting to move on to other things, and he did that extra season without it having been part of the plan, and so it ends up being a quite neat thing from start to finish. And so it kind of avoids some of those multi-year trailed sort of puzzle. You said puzzle box, but some of that kind of Riddler style, riddling kind of stuff that goes over many years, and we're still debating about why the Pandorica opened or what happened in the Big Bang and why was the TARDIS there, none of which is particularly resolved. There is a problem actually of that type in precisely Heaven Sent, which does lower my enjoyment of what is otherwise, I think, a fabulous, and I don't mean to diss it by saying this, but a fabulous bit of artifice, a triumph of style over substance, and I mean that very seriously.
Yeah.
But I do.
No, I know that you love style over substance. That you buy that.
I always dress for the occasion. So I've no problem with style over substance when deployed appropriately. And I don't want to suggest there's no substance to this, but there are some issues I have with it. But yeah, Series 10 is for me the best because of the Moffat era, and I don't just say the best of the Moffat era. I think it's good. I like it. And one of the main reasons for that is that Bill is actually a good character. And we mentioned Michael Barrymore earlier. There's a Viz Profanosaurus entry, Barrymore, to be fatally holed beneath the waterline, derivation unknown. And I just feel that what Barrymore's this, what fatally, just for the edit, what fatally undermines this is the fact that I don't care about Clara. And this is an episode that's entirely about grief.
Yes.
This is the prison is the prison of grief. And it's a brilliant episode, the way that it spins around and confounds him, and he goes through all the stages of grief, anger, denial, all the rest of it. They're thrown in his face. He's working through it, and he's trying to be methodical about it. But it's a rage of these, a whirlwind of these different emotions. And as a sort of single piece of art, an exploration of someone's emotions as they try to handle that grief, it's an outstanding tour de force. I'm not in any way taking away from the writing. I quite like the puzzle. At least it's kind of a puzzle within itself. It's not, a fucking blue head in a box saying Doctor Who. It's not that kind of multi thing.
No, he figures it out. It has a solution.
Yeah. You can watch this and be satisfied with the solution about what this is in this episode. Which is what I quite like about, when Moffat does that, I quite enjoy it. I find when he leaves things dangling, but when he leaves things dangling, he tends to forget sometimes to tie them up. And
that's
I find
the thing.
unsatisfying.
And when you think what's so satisfying about watching something like Blink, which is the thing that everyone always, that will be the thing that's on his tombstone. It is that moment of sort of catharsis again, to use that word at the end, where it's like everything is revealed, and you go, "Oh yes, of course," and it's like, and that can be dramatically, profoundly satisfying at the end of 45, 50 minutes, an hour. At the end of 3 years, the exponentially how satisfying that has got to be just goes through the roof. And so, yes, of course, when it gets to and by the way, it was actually a robot, it's like...
What is it which I can't remember which of the Doctors it is, the Christmas episode. Day of the Doctor, Night of the Doctor, the perennial bit between Christmas and New Year of the Doctor. I don't know what the one that is set on the Christmas planet.
Yes.
Where he basically ends up on a spaceship with some woman who says, "Oh yeah, the silence, that was just that thing. It was just like that, they did X, Y, and Z." And it was just, "Oh right, okay." It's just like, it's exactly like you say, there's diminishing returns for that kind of thing. So this puzzle is kind of solved within itself, but it's best understood as a kind of single existential, slightly philosophical exploration of one man's grief and how the stages of grief are worked through.
Yeah.
Undermined for me more than slightly by the fact that this grief is about a character. I don't believe that Capaldi's Doctor loves Clara. I just don't believe it, because what could you love? She starts as a cipher, and this is no disrespect to Jenna Coleman, by the way, but she starts as a cipher, the mysterious girl. She becomes a sort of teacher with a family who we sort of drop. She falls in love with someone who's even more of a blank canvas than her, Danny Pink. His death we're meant to care about, but personally I didn't. And then she's meant to sort of represent this, rose level love of his life. Maybe not a sort of sexual love, more of a kind of agapeic love, but a soulmate love.
Yeah.
And I just don't buy it. And again, I don't want to give the impression that I'm dissing Jenna Coleman, but what is there in this character that gives us any kind of sense that there's a depth or an understanding or a reality? There's just nothing there. And if you don't buy into her when she's the person that he's grieving about, it does just kind of take you out of being fully engaged in that process of going through his grief with him.
Yeah.
So when you said that we won't be able to discuss this without picking apart other aspects of the Capaldi era, I completely agree. But it's precisely because of that I find myself not fully enjoing this.
That's
Nonetheless,
what sort of lets the side down. Yeah.
The other thing. Sorry, let me finish, if you wouldn't mind. The other thing that
we've got all evening.
Yeah, thanks. The other thing I wanted to say was, and the other side of that, so from Face the Raven into Hellbent, so I kind of discussed why I'm dissatisfied because of the sort of Clara side of things. And the other side of it, with it was the Time Lords all along, and they've been trying to find out, they're trying to find out what the hybrid is, and that's another one of those Moffat things where it's never really explained what the hybrid is, and
I'm going to slightly... I mean, I agree it's not, but I also think it's sort of made apparent in the finale, and obviously we're not reviewing Hellbent here, but I sort of rate the fact that the hybrid, which is wrapped up as a storyline in the next episode, is, in this case, a MacGuffin. It's something that everyone's worried about and is terribly, terribly concerned about finding out what it is. And let's make it clear, the Time Lords imprison the Doctor in this thing in order to pump his brain for what it is. And it sort of turns out to be, like, not a thing. And there's certainly a line in there. To me, that sort of...
Really?
Like, I found that sort of quite effective, that there wasn't the hybrid is this or something, that it was actually... They were all chasing a MacGuffin, essentially, on that. And, it is, whether or not you think that's a worthwhile route for a series, it definitely is done and dusted by the end of the next episode. We're not being teased the hybrid for years to come.
I guess. No, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I guess at the point where, having endured the Matt Smith era, and then being dangled this hybrid stuff, I was just kind of hoping that maybe he'd, it was going to be a thing. I wouldn't have cared if it was, I mean, I'm glad it wasn't a half Dalek, half Time Lord when we've seen the upshot of splicing the Time Lords with another iconic race.
This did make me laugh, because obviously it's teased in the opening voiceover that it's the myth of the hybrid, half Time Lord, half Dalek, the ultimate warrior creature. And then in the dialogue partway through the episode, the Doctor just dismissed that out of hand as just like, yeah, that's a ridiculous idea. That would never happen. They wouldn't let it happen. And then a couple of years later, yes, you have Cybermen going around with big Time Lord collars on. So it's like... Which
weirdly, I think would have worked in the 80s, because I'd have probably gone, yeah, fuck it. I'd have cracked open a tinny and watched that and laughed. Whereas when it's done ostensibly with good production values, it just
when
feels
that
cheap.
Much money is spent executing that idea,
exactly,
to that high level, it's just like, oh, yeah.
When those sordid tales of what went in behind the scenes.
Anyway, that's looking ahead.
Or maybe they will come out in 30 years' time.
All right,
Operation Cherry Tree.
So
but no,
we've set this in the context of the Capaldi era, which we both broadly like. Maybe me a bit more than you, but there we go. But
I agree with you that it's an improvement on Matt Smith's era. I don't like it as much as you do. I like Series 10 as much as you do.
Yes.
But I think Clara, for me, not ruins, that's very unfair. I think this is a good episode. I think it's overrated. I think it's a good episode.
Yeah.
But I can't buy into the grief, because I know the character he's grieving about, and frankly, she's a shop dummy of a character. So there's nothing there. It's like there's no one home. Mm-hmm. And again, I've seen Jenna Coleman act in other stuff, and I'm not saying that she's I'm not saying she's like Meryl Streep, but she's all right. She's a good actress. Fine. I've seen her do better stuff and be fine. And this is in the writing. There's just nothing there, you know. So if you don't buy into her as a character, it's difficult to buy into the grief. However, Capaldi sells it. The writing is good. His bravado is so deliciously unconvincing. Capaldi really sells how he's putting up a front. And the Doctor is even kind of persuading himself of this front, but he's not fooling us. And that's the art of Capaldi as an actor in that. I think Murray Gold deserves a lot of credit for the sound work in this. The music fuses with sound. He goes through many different musical registers in this, from kind of 80s synth work through to a wonderful aping of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. At one point, there's some medieval stuff that he plays when the Doctor is coming down a particularly gothic corridor, and the hooded figure of death and the kind of run around and the gaming that's going on and the philosophical asides and voiceovers. I mean, it does feel very reminiscent. I mean, there's so many memento mori in this. Death hangs over everything, not just Clara's death, but one's own mortality. I mean, the Seventh Seal, Bergman's, masterpiece. It's more than an homage, and that's not just in the acting and the writing. It's in the sound work and the music that Murray Gold's done as well. So I think that there's much to praise in this, and it does pull from the Moffat box of tricks, but it does so in a satisfying way within itself. It's just a pity that the previous episode is Face the Raven and that the following episode is Hellbent. And I find that it is undermined to some extent by the fact that it's in a run of episodes that are exploring a thing I don't much care about. And as you said, if that's the case, then that's going to colour your view of it. Yeah. But I wouldn't want to give the impression that I think this is a waste of Doctor Who. It's interesting and it's scary, and one of the most economical shots I've ever seen is in this, which is just the Doctor thinks the monster isn't there, and then the monster comes from behind a door. Yeah. And it's just shot so quickly by Rachel Talalay. It's just monster appears from behind a door, and it's the scariest thing I've seen for it. It's just, I jumped out of my skin when that bloody thing was there, and I should have guessed it was, but it was just nicely done. It was just nicely done, and the designs are good, the sets, the locations they obviously found for it, fantastic. So look, it's beautifully done.
And as a location, it's interesting that it sort of feels real and dreamlike at the same time. Yeah, there's the sense. I mean, almost in a way, he is literally trapped in a puzzle box. This thing keeps spinning around and reconfiguring itself, but it has such a powerful sort of sense of place. I mean, I want to talk just a bit about Peter Capaldi in this. I mean, partly because for the most part he's the only actor in it, so there aren't any other performances to talk about. But I find it interesting.
That is quite unfair to Jenna Coleman. She has more than 2 lines, I think, in this.
And someone standing in playing the back of her head as well at that chalkboard as well.
That's not her at all, is it?
No, I think that's a deliberate choice in the way that it's a sort of memory of her rather than just a bad stunt double, because she was under contract. She could have stood in front of a blackboard for 3 shots. It's like, but anyway, that's by the by. It's interesting that, I mean, it's always tempting to think of the Peter Capaldi Doctor as being like, I mean, I know Jim has referred to him as just like the bastard Doctor, basically. I mean, I know Jim is not a huge fan of the Capaldi run.
Well, I think that's I might say I'm very much with Jim Hall, formerly of this parish, very much still part of the I'll Explain Later family.
Well, he's in the chat, I think. That's
Oh, who is he on the chat?
I'm assuming he's Teddy the Dog 71. Could you confirm?
Oh yeah, because he's the one who's been most offensive so far, so that makes sense.
He's the one making the most personal comments,
ripping us a new one. And was he the one who said, "I was surprised that John turned up on time"?
Yes.
Yeah, that figures.
Jim, if you're there, just confirm exactly your thoughts on Peter Capaldi. But while we wait for Jim,
but I agree with Jim. I agree with Jim a lot. Certainly, after Series 8, I was pretty dismayed because I was delighted when Capaldi was cast. And I thought in Series 8 they were making a lot of the mistakes that kind of Colin Baker era style mistakes, like just about him being unlikable and so on. And they did actually play that through, I suppose, more effectively than they did in the mid-'80s, surprisingly.
They peel the onion quite effectively. But
They do.
What I would say is that in relation to the sort of slightly more, and this term has been used dismissively, I don't use it as such, but the slightly more kind of emo doctors, particularly the way, David Tennant emotes, and it's a much more kind of emotional portrayal of the Doctor than we've seen before. I think this is a profoundly emotional performance that he gives here. And I think generally, I mean, he's not like this all the time. He's a bit more of a sort of sourpuss. But when he really lets it off the chain, you've got rage, you've got grief, you've got denial, you've got fear. Almost the bit where he says, and I think it's a very elegant device, that of him imagining that he's in the TARDIS when he's trying to think his way through a problem. Obviously, thinking really fast in a different time frame to what else is.
Well, I mean, it's Moffat has been there before.
Well, it's the Sherlock Mind Palace in a different form.
Precisely.
It's an attempt to sort of, and almost like it's a route they didn't really go down any further, but in the 11th hour where you've got that sort of doctor camera, it goes.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I thought that was quite effective. Actually, yes, that's true, and that's
there's been an attempt to find a visual language to explain how these sort of, the Doctor and Sherlock in this case, these kind of high-functioning characters, how their brains actually work in a way that you can appreciate even if you might not understand. And I think particularly for this, where, you've got to have the Doctor sort of figuring things out, it avoids him, it avoids the clumsy visual metaphors that, again, not to preview what we're going to say, but the Chibnall series sort of falls down the well of multiple times, of the Doctor standing in an environment thinking out loud and going, oh, but I wonder if this, or wonder if this, or wonder if this. Whereas that sense of like making it a sort of more stylized version of what's going on in the character's brain works very well. But that bit where he's sort of, and he's using the memory of Clara as a sounding board. So he says, what do I do next? And then the words appear on the chalkboard, you win. And that moment where he just considers just giving up and not doing it, and he says, and he just looks so tired and so beaten.
Yeah, I wrote that down as well. So tired.
I think this is a profoundly emotional performance. And
lockdown will do that to people. I mean, that's why we chose this one.
Yes,
that's why we chose this episode, right?
Oh, yeah, we've sort of slightly strayed from the thought that yes, this is a man. Well, as the meme puts it, bored in the house, essentially for a very very long time. For a profound. I mean, that's another Moffatism, is the sort of casual deployment of vast periods of time. So, how many billion years is it that he ultimately spends?
2, isn't it? 2 billion years.
Like, it's an insane period of time. But again, here, and this is saying like it's the Moffat box of tricks, deployed well and made to work. Here, you feel that as part of the dramatic heft of what the story's got to do. Whereas something like, Rory having to be a 2,000-year-old Roman or something, which is thrown in because there's almost that sort of Douglas Adams sense that big numbers are funny. He's now 2,000 years old, but there's actually there's no sort of dramatic impact of that, because it's just such a sort of, it's a sterile concept that you can't really relate to. Whereas here, that whole sequence at the end where everything's sort of laid bare, where the Doctor realises that basically he's got to punch through this wall, and he tells the story over successive time frames of the
as we said in the intro, takes his fist to a hard one.
Takes his fist to a hard one, yeah.
A solo Palmer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he doesn't vary his punching hand, which really bothers me. He just keeps bashing his right knuckle. I know that we
spend 2 billion years punching through.
Each man has a bias, but I would have thought he could bring his left hand into employment in this particular endeavour.
But I think that sort of rallying montage of where you see the cycle that he's just been through accelerating again and again, but him getting further into the wall, him telling more of the story about the little bird sharpening his beak until eventually the wall sort of comes down.
That's good telly.
Sorry?
That's good telly.
It's magnificent. I think it's just beautifully executed. Almost then, to his surprise, when the thing actually cracks and he's through to the other side. It's an absolute tour de force. You sort of realise that. I guess to the extent to which, Capaldi is so rooted in the sort of the lore of the series, like he knows classic Doctor Who like the back of his hand, and there are certain ways in which he sort of presents himself in the publicity material. He's always doing the Pertwee point, and he dresses like the Third Doctor a lot. He's even got full Pertwee hair by season 10.
I remember when they did the Zoe Ball introduction, and he came in twiddling his.
And he comes in clutching his lapels. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
a la Hartnell, right?
There's almost a worry that this is going to be a fan's portrayal of the Doctor. It's just going to be an amalgam of all the bits that he liked or remembered growing up with, in the way that. I don't like Mark Gatiss' writing, because it's just that sort of constructed memory of Doctor Who versus writing anything that actually sort of drives it forward. But
he actually hasn't advanced beyond that. That sketch that he wrote for the Doctor Who night on BBC Two, when you're going to take me now, old girl. He actually hasn't advanced his understanding of where the show should be from that, really.
And those are much shorter as well.
Blissfully so. Yeah.
But here, it's like, Capaldi takes the Doctor to places that we've not seen on screen before, and really sort of, just even the implication of like a sort of life that he's lived, and the little hints of that. Again, not to be talking about the Chris Chibnall era, but
Jibbers,
the whole Timeless Children reveal, which we'll talk about whether that's a good idea on another occasion, but very, very much lays it all out on the table. Whereas this, it becomes intrinsically about Gallifrey and the Time Lords, but just the little details that he throws in about, which is ostensibly a rewriting of the canon, but that idea of like, I didn't leave Gallifrey because I was bored, I left because I was scared. In the context of a man having a sort of full capacity breakdown here, as he seems to be doing, it's powerful stuff, and he goes there, and he's just a brilliant actor. Yeah, and I quite like there are lots of things that I think play really well in this. You're much better placed. You used to be a horror film podcaster, and it's a genre that you're much more engaged with than I am, Matt. But there are simple things that kind of fall into that. Like I said, the monster leaping from behind the door. Such a cheap thing to do, but so well done in this. The millions of skulls. The Catholic language of confession and judgment, so gothic, and so there's something that is not just castle but church-like about many of the places that the Doctor finds himself in, and all of that is magnificent. And I found as well that just the monster, the ghost of Christmas yet to come, as the veil, I think they call it. The veil, whatever. But the fact that he talks about the old woman who died, and it was a hot day, and the flies started buzzing. It's such a. You can imagine kids going, Yeah. You can imagine that, and it was interesting how that was clearly, because it's his. In many ways, it's his fears that manifest in this prison of his very own, right? And there's a way that image. And this is so true of the way that children think and the way they develop. The things that you're scared of as a child that stay with you, your image of them becomes enriched and more vivid and scarier than it could possibly have ever been. They become embellished in your mind as primal fears. And so this shrouded woman, I'm sure it wasn't a pleasant thing to look at but it certainly wasn't this looming hooded figure with the great weird claws hands. Yeah, exactly. But I thought that was really good, and it kind of is indicative of the tales that we tell ourselves, the accumulated way that the way that memory works and tricks us, because we don't remember things faithfully. We build a narrative out of the events in our lives. Yeah.
and that's how we bring meaning and structure to our lives, and the fears that kind of shape the limitations and the prisons of our mind, and I think that all of that stuff is very well done, and it's certainly done with a lot more, it's still quite grim and heavy, but it's done with a lot more lightness of touch than, say, the grim and heavy stuff we were talking about in Caves of Androzani. There's the jokes are funnier, even when they ring hollow in his mouth, they're still funny, right? And there is that hope when he figures out, even though it's a forlorn hope, because he realizes what he's going to have to do to get out of the situation, but he finds a way to get out of what seems like a hopeless situation.
Yeah.
It's undermined, of course, by the fact that once he's out, he becomes this very unlikable avenging angel. And I have no time for that, really, at all. It's not handled with the, oh my god, he's mentally ill, sort of stuff that I found much more persuasive with the Time Lord Victorious. Not the multimedia strand thing, but I mean in Waters of Mars, and where you get the impression that the character is actually unhinged and he's not about to go off and do something stupid.
Christopher Eccleston wanting to machine gun the Dalek, or torture the Dalek.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been in this kind of area before, but just like putting on the shades and going, give me your coat, your gun on your motorcycle, or your boots on your motorcycle. For me, it doesn't. I'm not interested in the Doctor being that. I'm okay with him being damaged, but I don't know. There's something about it that doesn't sit right with me, and it's a shame because we've just got to the point where the hope has been delivered back into the episode, and then he goes from that to vengeful anger, and it's like, if this is an episode about grief and the castle is a physical manifestation of grief, and he's worked through that grief, the poetic, the dramatic ending of it is acceptance, and he gets to the end of that and he hasn't accepted, and it kind of undermines how neat and how poetic and how beautifully constructed this episode is. So as I say, I find that what bookends it does colour my enjoyment of what I consider to be a very technically and artistically adept episode of Doctor Who, but hats off to everyone involved.
And if the lockdown had an anthem on the platform, this is it. The platform's biggest star, American teenager Charli D'Amelio, garnering 8 million likes with her take on the sound. D'Amelio's profile reveals she has an astonishing 55 million followers.
Well, we don't have 55 million followers. But
no, and we wouldn't bleep the line "board in the motherfucking house" either.
Indeed, we would not. Although it's a lot funnier bleeped than said out loud. And that's why we chose the clip. But I would like to say thank you to both our listeners and indeed both the viewers who've tuned in tonight to listen to us wang on. I hope that this hasn't completely destroyed what residual affection you may have had for the podcast. It may have done for Matt and me, but I hope it hasn't for you. And
yes, as Vaishti's pointed out, there are 14 people in the chat, and we've definitely held that audience throughout the show. So I feel that's an achievement.
I regularly come across those adverts on YouTube where Cillian Murphy is saying, the Irish castles, and I can get you to sleep and all that. So, if this has been an insomnia aid for anyone, I guess they wouldn't be around to message in that had worked for them. But
absolutely, very true.
But I hope that in some way or other this has been helpful for you tonight. And at a time when we are, in lockdown and things are a bit tricky, I'm sorry that you've had to listen to this.
I know. Yeah, it sort of
can't believe
like
it's lifted your spirits.
We went through all of the stages of feeling we could make something positive this lockdown. We did our baking. We tried to read those novels, and then at the end of it, let's just watch some Doctor Who.
This is all we were left with.
I'm just going to throw a few, just tie up a bit of business from the chat. So Jim has checked in to say, I don't remember calling Capaldi the bastard Doctor, but I'm glad we didn't review any more of his era while I was here. So there you go, Jim making his feelings known.
Well,
but yes.
Jim, if nothing else, always made his feelings known, and
100%.
we certainly appreciated that, and do continue to correspond with us.
So live episode then. We did it. They said it couldn't be done.
No one said it couldn't be done. I think very few people suspected that we could do it, but we have
were
done
fixated
it
for so long as to whether we could do it. No one paused to think whether we should. But there
very
you go.
good. Very good.
Zing. Gonna do this again then? Probably.
Yeah, I think so. Although not if it involves anybody photoshopping your head onto Ian Malcolm's body. I don't think I could stand that.
I mean, it's good because I always like to insist on a level of social distance from you anyway, so this is perfect.
It's ideal. Yeah. I mean, this is the closest we've been in some months, actually.
Yeah.
Let's not do this again. Okay. Well, on that bombshell,
thank you so much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this. As I say, this will be available as a podcast if you want to listen to it again for whatever reason.
The lawyered version will be up.
The lawyered version will be up. I don't think we libelled anyone too badly this time, did we?
I think Barrymore's fair game these days, isn't he?
Oh, Christ. You've ruined it now. We'll give it a listen and double check. But thank you so much for watching. It's been fun. Thank you for your contributions during the show. Let's do it again sometime.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.